My guest today on the Essential Coaching Skills podcast is Aldo Civico. Aldo is a doctor of anthropology, but you wouldn't know it because he's an executive coach. He's an author. He's a conflict resolution expert. In fact, he's facilitated ceasefire talks in Colombia between the government and rebel groups. He's supported peace-building efforts in all different parts of the world, and he's recently become a havening techniques trainer. So we'll ask him about all that stuff, but particularly about the havening techniques, because why does he need that for all those other things? In just a minute here on the podcast. Stay tuned. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills podcast, a show devoted to uncovering the systems and the secrets that set the best apart, where you learn how to take your coaching clients to the next level, while you grow the coaching practice of your dreams. So sit back and relax, or sit up and get excited. Either way, you might want to pay attention. This could be important. Aldo.
Hello. How are you? Good to see you, Doug.
Good to see you too. Where are you?
I'm currently in Miami, which is one of the cities where I like to dwell around.
Ah, okay. So you were most recently in Colombia, though, were you not?
Yeah, since the pandemic. I mean, Colombia is a country that I've been traveling to for the past 20 years quite regularly, but I got stuck with the COVID pandemic when we shut down the airports, and I just decided to remain there even when they open up the airport. So that's now my main base for now.
All right, cool. Yeah. So quite a history. You have a doctor of anthropology from Columbia University. It's funny that you're in Columbia now because you went to Columbia University in New York City.
Yeah.
And how did I'm just curious. This isn't necessarily part of what people want to hear from the essential coaching skills, but how did you get from anthropology to conflict resolution?
Well, here I actually got from conflict resolution to anthropology, and how it happens was that I was about to enroll in a master in international affairs at Columbia University at SIPA, the School of International Affairs. And the founder and the director of the Center for International Conflict Resolution, who happens also to be an Italian, Andrea Bartoli, told me at one point, you're wasting your time and money doing a master, you should do a PhD. And I said, a PhD in what? Well, he said, you are interested in conflict. So conflicts is about complexity and understanding context. So he said, you should study anthropology. And I said, great. So I did. It is really how it went. and I actually was quite curious because in my previous understanding of anthropology was about studying Bushmans around, right. And I didn't understand what does it have to do with modern contemporary armed conflicts. But anthropology has to do with everything that is human and human expression. So it makes sense that it studies also those kinds of things. And that's what I did. Yeah. And I really enjoyed it, actually.
Right. So you've also along the way become an executive coach.
Yeah. So that happened from conflict resolution actually to executive coaching, because what happened was that as I was doing my ethnographic work for my PhD, but also my conflict resolution work in Colombia, I was meeting these leaders of death squads or narco traffickers or rebels who were in high security prisons. And we the excuse to meet was actually to interview them for my research, but it ended up then becoming a relationship and a sustained conversation. And what I realized was that the conventional tools of conflict resolution were actually not enough to change identities that have been, rooted in decades of conflict. So it was not about, let's find out what are, our common ground between two conflicting interests. It was much deeper than that. And so I felt that conflict resolution, as I knew it and as I was practicing it, was limited in that. So I asked, is there someone who actually is able to do work in changing the identities? And completely randomly one afternoon, I ran into a video by Tony Robbins where on 9/11 he does this workshop I think he was in Hawaii, right on 9/11, and where he mediates, really, he negotiates between an Orthodox Jew and a Muslim guy from Pakistan. And the video was called Indirect Negotiation. So that's really what caught my attention. And I was completely blown away, because I said, wow, if someone is able to do that on 9/11, in that room with the tragedy just that happened in New York the same day, with people from New York there, and he's able to do that, he's really good. I mean, he's not BSing, right? So that's actually when I started to understand really who Tony Robbins is, who I already had in corner of my eyes, really not looking at him much. And that's when I discovered Ericksonian hypnosis and NLP. And so I started entering, in those fields and studying them and training them and certifying eventually in all those disciplines. And most importantly, I was applying them and integrated them in the work that I was doing with these very kind of people. And I was seeing the effect. So I was shuttling between New York at the time and Colombia. And when I was coming back to my friends who were members of family offices or had businesses, I was telling these experiences. And I remember one point, a good friend of mine who's part of a very important large family office in the US, and she's an anthropologist. She told me, well, we have our own domestic terrorists on our boards. Would you mind and come and talk to us and share your experience? And really, that's how it worked. That's how then I little by little included working with teams, family offices, business teams on alignment, on conflict resolution, on leadership skills, and eventually that's what I'm doing a good part of my time today.
Cool. Well, it's probably a lot safer than going to high security prisons and going to the jungles of Colombia to negotiate between the government and rebel groups.
Yeah, easier, not safer, but not necessarily easier. That's because those people in armed groups have very disciplined mind. They're actually very good at discipline and following instructions, and so once they set their mind to something, they actually do it.
That's interesting.
Not necessarily executives.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
Transition.
Did you meet a lot of executives in the high security prison? Is that how you got into executive coaching?
I met executives in prisons, not in high security, really. But yeah, I met them too in prison.
That's funny. So most recently, because you weren't busy enough, you decided to take on the havening techniques, which I will firmly and proudly claim that I introduced you to a few years ago. But you decided to, basically go all in there, and you became recently a trainer of havening techniques. So tell us about that. Why did you feel like you wanted to add havening to this resume of yours?
Yeah, I have to admit that on one hand, I'm always a very curious mind, right? And so if there's something new that interests me in general, I like to understand what it is and possibly learn it. But I remember that conversation we had in Wall Street outside, sipping a coffee, when you told me about that, and that really caught my attention. Even though I didn't, start right away, just because the schedule didn't allow for much time in training something new. But I have to say that increasingly in my work, I have discovered that many times self-sabotaging mechanism, or why people don't go full in achieving what they are set to or want to achieve, is actually because there has been a trauma in the past. And it might be even a micro trauma that they don't remember, but that somehow got them stuck, and increased anxiety or increased fears or uncertainty, doubt, and they slow down. And I'm not interested in going to psychotherapy and having those long verbal conversation, but to have a tool that would help someone, to quickly release what is blocking that debilitating emotions, and help them in the process of actually being able to be more proficient, more happy, and more in a state of flow, really attracted me. That was really one of the motivation within my work. The other motivation is that a lot of my work has been in Latin America, and Latin America is a country where you do encounter trauma because of even, especially in Colombia, recent conflict, and it often happens that I meet people, whether they are clients or in other situations, that tell me about pretty strong and deep trauma. So to have a tool that in an easy but also powerful way is able to help people, and also to give them actually a tool so that they can sustain that change, really fascinated me. And of course, I had heard of other psychosensory methods and techniques that are out there, EMDR and tapping and all of that. But it was really talking to you when I discovered that there was some principle that are rooted in neuroscience, and there was no simple a magic or a placenta effect of it, but there are electrochemical things that happen that actually help you to the link, the trauma from your emotional reaction. That is really what convinced me. And it also happened that a friend of mine who was Justin Bieber's health coach told me about how much having it has been effective with him. His name is Buzz Minjin, and
Yeah,
so
I imagine.
that I say, okay, let's do it, because it's working. It's you can teach it in a simple way. People can learn it. It's pretty natural. It's pretty organic.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
basically what we do already. Just do it intentionally. And
Yeah. Well, that's one of the amazing things about havening, is it is just so kind of natural, and yet there is that pretty irrefutable, rock solid science behind it that Dr. Rudin has provided for us. So it's interesting.
Yeah, which we guess, especially in the Western world, we need those explanations, right? We want to really know what is happening, and to me particularly, always to knowing why this is working helps me really to not only to teach it but also to practice it. It gives me more focus and attention at what needs to happen for this to actually be effective. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's also curious to me that I agree with everything you've said, and you didn't need to become a trainer to do what you've just said. So
true.
I spent a lot of effort and time to go up to that next level. So
effort, time, money, even though it's not who knows what, but still an investment. The thing is that I realized that in South America and in Spanish-speaking countries, there are not many practitioners yet. I think last time I checked, it's like 4 or 5 people. And as I said, the Spanish countries are there is, like everywhere in the world, really, a lots of trauma. So being able to help people train in havening, because I don't think it's interesting, or that I'm one of the few practitioners in an entire continent doesn't make sense.
Right.
And I think it's a nice, spreading and helping others to become practitioners and mentoring them and training them. I think it's helping creating a movement of people focused on healing and helping humanity heal. And I think it's, for me, just another way of giving my contribution to a better and more peaceful world doing that. So plus I like to teach, I like to train, I like to mentor. So it just fits.
Well, that's beautiful. And, gosh, as I think I've said before, I'm thrilled to have been somewhat responsible for you.
Totally responsible.
Because, golly, because you already are an amazing contribution to exactly what you said, making the world a more peaceful place and to heal as best we can. So tell me how you think you might be going about this. How could people like train with you? Where will you be doing it in Colombia mostly, or will you be?
Well, we'll do a combination. The first training I will offer will be in Spanish. Will be in Colombia, in Medellin, on December 6th and 7th. It will be just a small group to get things started and to be able to follow and mentoring the participants in a very close way. And it's actually interesting that the first people that sign up are from Panama and Uruguay, not even from Colombia. So just to say how people are willing to travel, for several. Well, from Panama it's just an hour, but from Uruguay it's several hours to be able to do it. That was interesting as a response. But I also plan mostly to do online training, just because. First of all, it's effective. That's how I got trained, because I became a practitioner during
COVID,
your mentoring, during COVID. So I know it works, and I do having a session today by Zoom, and it works perfectly. You don't have to be in person, and it's a lot of money and logistics and airplanes and days and hotels.
Sure,
If you have to travel. So I think it's also a way to help people, to give them the option, if you really want to do it in presence, to give them that option. There are people who definitely prefer the effort and the travel and all of that, but also for people who might not be able, even just financially, to do the whole thing. To offer that training.
No, it's good. It's amazing actually to have both. It was before COVID, we chatted about it, we talked about it. Dr. Rudin and some others and myself. The possibility of maybe doing some kind of remote training somewhere for some people who are like in hard to get to places, etc. And they thought, well, maybe we could do that. I mean, it might work. And then suddenly COVID is like, okay, that's the only thing you can do.
Well, and it was also, I remember I called you and said, I asked you that question and said, hey, are you doing actually in this COVID? Because I finally had time, right? I was sitting around at home and said, this is a time to learn something new. And I remember I told you, are you doing, is having possible online? Are you doing training? You say, yeah, I'm about to facilitate one. So I jumped on the opportunity, and it was really effective, really, really powerful.
Yeah. And it's actually become quite remarkable that many people have only that experience at this point in time.
Yeah. Well, I am one of those. It will be interesting. That's one of the reasons why I do it small, actually, in Medellin presence. Because it will be the first time ever I will do something related with having in person. But it was funny because these two psychotherapists from Panama who contacted me and wanted to train, they insisted on doing it in person. I offered to do it online and said, no, let's do it in person. So I said, okay, let's go with it.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing, because there are some obvious differences that when a person is online, the only person who can apply the Havening touch is the person there. Do it to yourself, like I'm demonstrating right now, doing the Havening touch to yourself. But in person, of course, it's optionally could be the case too. You could both people sitting in the same room, and you just sit across from each other and do this for themselves. But most times, it's done that the Havening practitioner applies the touch to the patient or to the client. And so that you got to learn how to do that. It's an interesting thing to be able to put your hands on somebody else's face and just do the strokes. And it has some great advantages, because so much is communicated other than consciously through the body, through the touch. So if a person is like really freaking out, and the very calm person who knows it's going to be okay reaches out and says it's going to be okay, there's a lot of communication coming through there that happens very fast. And the practitioner has to be able to get into that state and have that certainty in order to do that. Because if they're freaking out themselves and they put their hands on somebody else, that gets communicated too. It's like, oh, you're right. We're gonna
That's
so, but
yeah,
your hands off me. You want to stick. Yeah. So,
and I think it's such a, and I do think that some of that is also goes through also online, even though definitely the touching is a different experience. But I think it's part of that healing part, because is the touching, the being there with a state from a state of calm. I think it's part of a healing process, because it relaxes the entire autonomic nervous system, able again to experience connection, because many times, if not all the time, trauma, what it does is really to interrupt the connection, right, with yourself and with others. So that feeling, that touching, which is comfortable, soothing, and safe, I think it has a very deep healing effect. In addition to what happens to the depotentiation of amygdala through the having touch.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is also, again, that kind of amazing confluence of realities is that it is sort of natural, like if a mother is reassuring their child that the thunder is just a noise, you're okay, and they don't tap them, they don't tell them to sit down and let's talk about where this came from and analyze your past. They just say it's okay, and they stroke their head, stroke their arm, it's a human thing to do, and yet there's a reason for it, and what science behind it that Dr. Rudin discovered for why this actually works so well, why the arms, why the face, why that touch and applied in that way, why it works is just so remarkably accurate and effective, much more so in my book at least than tapping would be, or eye movement sort of thing.
Many times to my clients I suggest that they can do Heavening because it's so natural, even when they are in a subway or in an Uber, or what in a movie theater or whatever, and nobody would notice, that you're doing so. Well, instead of tapping, someone would say, "What's going on? How do you feel?" And so it's nice to have the possibility to just do it in any moment when you feel like, not only when you need it, but when you feel like giving a massage to your brain, you can do that.
Yeah. So I am thrilled that you are going to be bringing this to Colombia first, South America, and all sorts of Spanish-speaking areas as well. I mean, it's a neat thing to watch. I remember I was at a Tony Robbins event. This isn't the only time this has ever happened, but I was at a Tony Robbins event many years ago, and everyone was given a candle, and then they turned out the lights. So we're in a room of several thousand people, and the only candle in the room after all the lights was off was Tony's. He had a big candle up on stage. Then he, somebody lit their candle off, Tony's candle, and then they started lighting candles off there, and it was amazing how quickly it spread, and the whole room was filled up with light from everybody's room that had their own candle lit. And I can sort of see that happening with Havening, with you in Colombia and you in South America, to be able to bring it there, because it's so sorely needed and it's so effective.
Thank you. That's really actually a nice wish, and it's really my desire, and also my commitment, because I do think that it brings a powerful, simple tool or practice to heal. And there's so much need, certainly South America, Latin America, but not only, but just to heal in times where, for example, mental health, has become an emergency almost everywhere. I have been living mostly in Colombia for the past 2 years, but if we look at this, for example, statistics of suicide attempts and suicides, they just went exponential, the numbers, sadly. So I think there is a lot of need for tools that take care of our emotional well-being, and not just healing, because that's certainly that's certainly how Havening came about as a first intention. But the fact that it also strengthens your resilience, your capacity for strengthening your self-esteem, your self-concept and your visualization exercises. I have been using it also with traders and the athletes, in helping them just to visualize results or getting to that calm that is linked to a peak performance. So it's not necessarily just a healing.
Wow, that's neat. I didn't know you were doing that.
Yeah. That's it's part of experimenting and part of when I do work on peak performance issues with professionals, I started introducing when we do visualizations or when we do affirmations or all of that, So without necessarily doing before, who knows what kind of healing process, but just to reinforce positive patterns.
Right. No. And that's, again, yes, that's one of the things that's so wonderful about the Havening techniques is that we really can do self-care. The healing is in our hands, and we have them with us pretty much wherever we go. I think most of the times I've always had, I can't remember a time I didn't have my hands with me. Let's put it that way. And so, it's right there. And so when you're doing a session with somebody, you're actually not just doing a session with somebody and healing them in the moment, but you're teaching them how to do self-care for the rest of their lives. And they can do this on a daily basis. In fact, I do it on a daily basis. And you do build that resilience. You build a stronger and more resilient landscape of the mind and the emotions. The other thing I like about it, Aldo, is that, and I think you can attest to this as well, is that it does, as Dr. Steve Rudin loves to say, bolt on really well with everything else I've learned previously. So all the NLP techniques, Ericksonian hypnosis, anything that I've been doing with people, add a little Havening to it. You're just, sort of creating a neuro cocktail of brain chemistry that makes everything work more effectively. It's kind of remarkable in that way.
Yeah, and I think that's really also something that appealed to me very much, because I think it's for me, being able to serve someone is having different tools at disposal, and then you mix them up as needed by the client. I have people who come up to me and say, "Hey, what is your advice? I want to become a coach." And I always say, start with one certification, with one course, one school, because you have to start somewhere, and it really doesn't matter where you start, as long as you feel connected and interested by that methodology. But I also suggest that you don't stay just with that, but you add different tools, because otherwise you will have the client that needs to adapt to you rather than you to the clients, right? And so that is also what I find so powerful in Havening, is that you don't have to leave other stuff, or it doesn't erase and cancel previous knowledge, because now there is this new up and coming thing and everything else is passé. No, it's actually very nicely integrated, also in a very organic way, and anytime that you see that can be something that helps a client, you can bring it to the forth, and I actually know of people that have been doing tapping, for example, as part of their methods, that integrate, tapping with Havening. So it's really complementary and powerful in itself as well. You don't have to integrate it. It's stand on his own in terms of effectiveness. So it's a nice thing. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you see it working with your conflict resolution? I mean, if you were to say, as an example, go back into the jungle.
Yeah. So working with conflict resolution is many times not only just sitting around a table and talking to rebels or people in arms. A lot of time it means working with communities that have been affected by trauma. So we are actually, I'm on the board of a foundation that works on peace building in Colombia, in peripheral area that have been, deeply marked by violence over the years. And we are looking at how we could integrate, the learning of self-havening, or even training some people in those communities in order to help, the healing process. Again, not as a only method, but integrated with a series of arrays of tools. So that's how I actually envision doing it. But I was talking to the Minister of Defense in Colombia in these days, and proposed to him to present it to the psychologists that work with soldiers who come back from the field and who experience PTSD, and that could be, for example, a contribution as well of police units. So there's also a law enforcement side that I've never really explored too much, but could be interesting.
Yeah.
So the application is just endless.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So you were talking with the defense minister the other day. If I had a nickel for every time I could say that phrase.
In Colombia, it's pretty easy actually to connect, easier than in other countries. But this guy I happen to know for at least 10 years, and he just was appointed Minister of Defense. So I wrote him, and I just have to remind him that this is something important before his eyes, so that we can do it.
Oh, that's really brilliant, actually, because it is effective, and I've seen it. I've worked with veterans, I've worked with police officers, I've worked with firemen. It works.
Yeah,
it really does. And it's different very often when you work with first responders, because they, in a sense, have a need to be vigilant. So their SUD, their SUDS score, the subjective unit of distress, will maybe not ever go down from 10 all the way to 0. They might want to keep a little of that vigilance thing lingering there to 1 or 2 level. Yeah. But still, it's 1 or 2 rather than 9 or 10. Yeah. Which can sometimes be totally debilitating, and that's not good either. So yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Good stuff, Aldo.
Let's have a little bit. Yeah. One thing about the touch, you were mentioning Tony Robbins. I remember we were doing at one point a very, very deep process, and the room was completely black, and people were screaming and crying.
Dickens pattern. You're
talking. Right. And one thing that Tony had recommended not to do was actually, if someone was starting to cry, to embrace them or to be with there, right? And I think the principle was, don't anchor that moment with an embrace and with a touch, right? And so when actually having it became, it is about touching after you reactivated the memory of something awful that had happened to you. I actually ask myself, is this working, or are we just anchoring a moment of pain and a moment of and instead that doesn't happen, right? When you do it again and again. So I'm curious about what your reading is about it. And we spoke briefly with Tony Burgess, who is the head trainer, about this. And my explanation for that is that it actually happens. You actually start in the moment of distraction. When once the trauma or the event is activated, and then you distract the mind. That's actually when you start touching, not in the moment of remembering. But the second one is that this is actually flowing, right? This is a movement, not just a touch. So that's probably also why it doesn't turn into an anchor. And it becomes an anchor for something actually soothing and calming.
Right.
What is your? I'm curious. What is your reading about it?
Well, since you asked, it is exactly what you just said. It is when we're doing a havening process, when we have them think about or remember the traumatic experience that they had, and they get activated, so their SUD score goes up to 10. We don't want to be havening them while that process is going up, while that process is taking place. But as soon as we start the havening process, we go into distraction. We say, okay, think of walking on a beach, and let's go someplace else. And at that point, the cognitive attention is drawn to other things. And so the havening touch is going to be then associated to the other things and not to the trauma. However, in situations where you're actually in the traumatic situation as it happens, so that you're there. It's not a therapy event. You're in a traumatic situation. Maybe you just had a car crash. Maybe you're sitting in a ditch or whatever it might be. At that moment in time, would it be good to do havening? And the answer is yes, it is. That would be a great time to do it. It would be great, because it will still downregulate your system. When you do this, the brain just happens to, because of this, the way the brain is set up. When you do this touch on these parts of the body, you get delta waves. And delta waves, because the body is electrical chemical, that's what it is. It's an electrical chemical organism. So the electrical signal, the delta waves, create the chemical response, which is dopamine and serotonin and GABA, which is a neuro inhibitor. So it does downregulate the system. So it will be a good thing to do, even in those those moments.
I agree.
And plus, if you've been doing, self-havening, it is an anchor now for you. This is
correct. So it's a positive anchor. Yeah.
So in the scary situation, if you start doing this, it's an anchor for like, okay, I'm safe. As as Judith Prager would say, the worst is over.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, Aldo, so how do people get hold of you if they want to do so?
The best way to get hold of me is by email, which is aldo@aldocivico.com, or even send me a WhatsApp message at 646-492-0372.
Great. We'll be sure to put that in the information below.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure.
Great conversation, Doug. Always a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for being here. See you again soon.
Bye.
This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.